Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to yet another History of episode for Mortal Kombat 1. With us having settled into the new era, and seeing as we've covered his somewhat brethren, it was only right that today we have a sit down and deep dive analysis of one of the most beloved fan characters of the franchise, a former member of the cybernetic Kuei, and host for the demon Enera, Smoke. Now Smoke himself is a very interesting character within the franchise, as despite his appearances having been few and far between, he has always been held up in very high esteem, even if he doesn't appear in quite as many games as his Kuei counterparts. Yet, even with that in mind, it hasn't stopped him being seen as this very slick and pristine character, as where there is smoke, there is fire. To truly understand Smoke though, we must actually delve a few decades back to get a better understanding of his character, his downfalls across previous timelines, and the many different alterations he has undergone for that of the present. As this character has had quite a lot of significant changes from timeline to timeline. So how has he evolved to where he is now? Well, before we dive into things, just a quick reminder as always, if you like what we do here and wish to see more episodes like this, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, as it goes a really long way with not just supporting the video, but the channel out as a whole. But anywho, let's get right into things. Now to touch on Smoke and really understand what he's all about, we have to talk about his origins and what became of him prior to the events of the games. So from what we know of Smoke, is that his real name is Tomas Verbada, one of many children who were kidnapped and recruited into that of the Kuei. So growing up, Tomas had little to no memory of his family, and very little is known of his true origin. And we would find out later down the line that this was all for very good reason, because at some point prior to his abduction, Tomas would actually be taken and sacrificed by a mysterious cult. So canonically, he was actually killed here. Yet, in a very ironic twist of fate, the demon he had been sacrificed to, an Enera, would actually use him as a vessel to return, killing the cultist that had taken his life and given him a second opportunity. Upon awakening from the massacre though, Tomas would mentally be stripped of these events, as it looked like the trauma of this all had rid his memory of his merge with the Enera. So going forward, and even when he was taken in by the Kuei, he had absolutely no understanding of how he obtained these powers, only that it was simply a part of who he was. Now the time he spent within the Kuei is largely shrouded in mystery, as it is something barely touched upon. But seeing as it was very common for children to die during its very brutal training, Smoke would be one of the few to make it through these trials, surviving the gauntlet and earning respect amongst his peers. At some point during his time in the clan, he would actually encounter and befriend a pair of cryomancers, Kuei and Bihan, better known as Tundra and Sub-Zero. Whilst Bihan was cold and distant, Kuei was the exact opposite. In fact, the two developed a brotherly bond within the Kuei that allowed them to pair up on missions together and execute them swiftly. They were a formidable duo, so this actually now takes us up to the end of the events of the first game, because in its aftermath, the Kuei representative, Bihan, had fallen and was killed by their clan rival, Hanzo Hasashi, also known as Scorpion. Displeased with his death, as well as Shang Tsung, as it was the sorcerer that had invited him, Smoke and the now newly titled Sub-Zero, owned by Kuei, would set off together in order to hunt down and eliminate the sorcerer. Yet, even with all of the drama and turmoil between Earthrealm and Outworld, the two could never quite find the correct opportunity to dispatch of him. But it's in the fall of Mortal Kombat 2 where things for Smoke take a very dark turn, as once Shao was defeated, the Kuei themselves began to start up the Cyber Initiative, You see, the Grandmaster believed that the future of the clan would be one encased in steel. To become the world's most dangerous assassins, they needed to rid themselves of their compassion, strip themselves of their humanity, and purge any instinct that could compromise their morality. Whilst Tomas and Kuei Liang were dedicated to the Lin Kuei, they simply couldn't abide by these new laws, and this very perverse and twisted vision of the clan. Thus, by not succumbing to their assimilation, they were seen as traitors in the clan's eyes, being pitted against their fellow Lin Kuei brothers, Cyrax and Sector. A massive battle broke out between the two sides, and although Kuei was able to slip away, Tomas was not so fortunate, as he was captured by them, pulled apart, and completely reconstructed as Unit LK-72. Coming into the events of Mortal Kombat 3, Smoke had started to lose all sense of being, as the Cyber Initiative truly had stripped him of humanity. Even so, there was this tiny small sliver of him that still kept fighting from within, and that would only occur during Shao Kahn's invasion, as the Lin Kuei had turned their back on Earthrealm and did decide to side with Shao Kahn, with Smoke himself being assigned the mission of tracking down Kuei Liang. This would of course pit the two friends against each other, forcing Smoke and Frost to clash. But the skill, fortitude, and heart of Kuei is what ultimately allowed him to defeat and then save his friend, as he was able to reprogram the Smoke unit and free Tomas from the Grandmaster's control. With his humanity restored, the two would go on to defeat the likes of Sector and even Cyrax, helping turn the tide of battle in Earthrealm's favour. Sadly though, during the climax of this game, it looks like his restoration was merely temporary, as once he was overwhelmed by Shao's army, he would then be decommissioned, preserved deep within the confines and bowels of his fortress. From this point onwards, Smoke would actually be absent for a very long time, completely missing the events of 4 as well as that of Deadly Alliance. It would be during the events of Deception where he would finally make his return, being found and greeted by a very familiar yet different face, Bihan, but now under the Noob Saibot mantle. Now the retrieval of Smoke wasn't out of some sentimental or nostalgic manner, but to Noob it was the value he possessed, as Smoke was nothing more than a mere instrument he could use to achieve greatness. With Shao's demise in Deadly Alliance, it opened up a vacuum of power that he wished to claim for himself. So he wished to revitalize Smoke and have him embrace both his cybernetic and demonic heritage. By doing so, Smoke could effectively function as a template for a cybernetic demon army, one that would be completely loyal to him, as his vision of conquest only grew more hungry. So this hunt would actually take them to the desolate wastelands of Outworld, and by chance or fate, the two would cross paths with Kuei Liang. Understandably, the younger brother would try to reach out to his sibling and a former best friend. Yet instead of greeting him with open arms, the duo would fiercely attack him, beating him within an inch of his life, as under Bihan's control, the two nearly tore him in half. It was only until the demon Serena interfered, to which the two would then retreat. This, however, wasn't truly a loss, as their plans would continue to go underway. For the rest of the events of Deception, the two play an extremely minor role, as Onaga's return hadn't really affected their character, and he would of course be vanquished by his pawn, Shigenko. So this now takes us into the events of Armageddon, and following their skirmish with Serena, the duo of Noob Smoke were forced to band together with the likes of Quan Chi. By doing so, they were able to mentally break the demon and find out the new headquarters for the Lin Kuei. They were able to launch a massive siege on their temple, and this can be seen during the game's conquest mode, as Smoke is able to transform members of the Lin Kuei into these nanotech demons. It is only until the pair cross paths with Taven will finally be stopped. And with Noob's defeat, and the assistance of Kuei Liang once more, Smoke would finally be purged of Bi-Han's control, gaining his own sense of free will and reclaiming whatever was left of his soul. Tragically though, this is all a little bit too late for Smoke, as coming into the events of Armageddon, the apocalypse was now on the horizon, and with forces amassing on both that of the light and the dark, the cyborg can be seen during the final battle, combating the forces of darkness for the very last time, as Tomas would be one of the many casualties of this war, fighting to its final hours, as Blaze is consumed by Shang. Now coming into Mortal Kombat 9, not too much has changed about the character. He does get sweet crazy hair, but in terms of story, Tomas's origin does largely stay the same here. If anything, his partnership and somewhat brotherhood with Kuei is a little bit more fleshed out, but not too much has been changed here, at least until a little bit later on. When we first meet the pair, they are seen in Outworld once again, tracking down the whereabouts of Bi-Han's mysterious killer, as much like the original timeline. Kuei has once again donned the mantle of Sub-Zero. So during the MK2 section of the game, Smoke would seek out Shang Tsung, whilst Kuei sought out Scorpion. And eventually, he would cross paths with the Sorcerer, battling both him and his lackeys, until he is then suddenly attacked by an invisible figure, Sector, once again having fully succumbed to the Cyber Initiative. So much like the original canon, the echoes of the past continue to ripple to that of the present, as he is nearly transformed into a cyborg until he is rescued by Raiden. Having seen what would become of him, Raiden is able to electrocute the cyborgs and prevent Cyber Smoke from ever happening in this timeline, one of the many anomalies and deviations here. Thus, after being saved, Smoke would pledge his loyalty to Earthrealm and work by the Thunder God's side. But knowing that they were after the remaining members of the Lin Kuei, he would try to seek out Kuei to warn him, but by the time they arrive at the Colosseum, it is too late. Sub-Zero had been claimed, and you really get to see the devastation he feels in the following chapter, as all of that frustration and anger boils over when he crosses paths with Jade, believing her to still be aligned with Shao Kahn. It's only once he's defeated where he then simmers down, learning of when and where to save Princess Kitana, with events transpiring in a similar manner to that of the original canon, as Shao is defeated and then Earthrealm is invaded. Smoke would make very brief appearances throughout this installment. As he can be seen recruiting Cabal, he would find the unconscious husk of Kuei Liang's body, now fully cyberized by the Lin Kuei. So the roles are reversed in this timeline, and it is Smoke who takes him to the Earthrealm Defenders for restoration. From this point onwards, Tomas becomes a bit of a background character as the war rages on, but the biggest anomaly and change would come in the form of Sindel, having been tracked down by the Empress, and then empowered by the soul of Shang Tsung. She is able to go on a wild massacre that slays nearly all of the Earthrealm heroes, with Smoke being one of the many to fall to her hand. He would then make one last final appearance in the game's last chapter, becoming a revenant and pawn at Quan Chi's fingertips. Now coming into Mortal Kombat X, Smoke does play a very minor role, effectively serving as a puppet of Quan Chi's will, as once Shao Kahn is vanquished, the fallen elder god Shinnok would rise, laying siege against Earthrealm and seeking to corrupt its life force, the Jinsei. Smoke would be one of the many revenants guarding the fortress, with his most distinct moment throughout the entire game is that when he's referenced to as Smoke, he corrects Johnny, saying that there is only an Enera, meaning that whoever or whatever memory of Smoke that was once there may actually be lost now. After Shinnok is defeated, Smoke would continue to appear 20 years later, once Shinnok is freed once again, aiding in his corruption of the Jinsei, and even looking to find a portal to that of the heavens. Unfortunately, outside of this, once Cassie's team is able to defeat Shinnok, and the Revenants retreat to the Netherrealm, we never actually see or learn what becomes of Smoke prior to the events or during the events of Mortal Kombat 11, as he does just mysteriously disappear. And whilst his moveset is present in the Triborg unit, that character is kind of deemed as non-canon, as he's strictly reserved for that of DLC. It is only up until the new era though, where Tomas finally returns. And here, much has changed of him in this very new and very different timeline. Whilst, yes, he still does grow up in the Kuei, the circumstances of how he got there are incredibly different. As long prior to the events of Mortal Kombat 1, the Vabada family, a family of hunters, would accidentally stroll onto that of Kuei territory, something that they were completely unaware of that marked them as deadly threats and targets. During this unfortunate sequence of events, Tomas would lose both of his parents, as well as his twin sister. It was completely devastating for him, and the worst part is that it was all an egregious mistake, something that should not have happened. So grief-stricken by this news, the Grand Master of the Kuei would adopt him into the clan, hoping to right those wrongs by teaching him their ways and giving him a new family to grow up with, becoming brothers with the Grand Master's other two sons, Bi-Han and Kuei. Unlike the two though, it was very hard for him to keep up to pace, as both had supernatural abilities, with Kuei wielding fire and Bi-Han wielding ice. Thus, to stay on par with them, Smoke would utilize very ancient practical magics, as well as stealth in combat. By doing so, he did gain the title of Smoke. So, unlike that of the original canon, the Enera demon is no longer something that plagues him, and instead, Smoke uses his raw talent, skill, and mind in order to prove his worth to the clan. Now, Smoke does make his very first appearance in the opening chapter of the game, appointed by Fire God Liu Kang to test out two potential fighters for Earthrealm, Kung Lao and Raiden. This bout would have him and his brothers hold back, allowing them to gauge the skill, talent, and strength of these fighters, knowing if whether or not they were worthy for the Mortal Kombat tournament. This would actually lead to Smoke pretending to be a loan shark enforcer for the Kuei, as it even results in the body slam of Madame Bo, before then trading fists to Lao, which he would of course lose to. Tomas would make his next appearance much later on, during Bi-Han's chapter, and around this time, the relationship between Outworld and Earthrealm has significantly deteriorated. So the Kuei would be given the mission of tracking down Tsung and eliminating him. But it's during this chapter where we see a lot of turmoil sown between the trio, as prior to the events of the game, their father figure, the Grand Master, had mysteriously died, leaving the clan in the hands of the Cryomancer. On paper, Bi-Han is an ideal leader, strong, bold, and very dedicated, but his ideology for the clan's direction clashed against their tradition, where he sought greatness and glory, opposed to its selfless nature from hiding in the shadows. This does cause an argument between the two, with Bi-Han reminding him that he is Kuei in name only. Despite the friction between them, Smoke would join them in the infiltration of the Ying fortress, accompanying them as they are attacked by Natara and nearly plummets to his death. It's very lucky that he was able to survive here. By the time he reaches the top, Bi-Han would be successful in defeating both the vampire as well as Ermac. So Tomas would guard the outside of the fortress, allowing his brothers to complete their task. That is, until he encounters Kuei running out, learning that Bi-Han struck a deal with Tsung and that he was responsible for killing their father. Now branded as traitors, a fight would break out between the brothers, with Bi-Han defeated and then carried away to answer for his crimes. From this point onwards, Tomas does kind of become a bit of a background character, as he can be seen once again infiltrating the Ying fortress, as well as battling against Titan Shang's army, but it's only up until the end of the game itself, where we begin to see Smoke's future in this new era and timeline. because with Bi-Han having escaped, and then forcing them to that of Japan, Kuei and Tomas would be reunited with an old family friend, Harumi, who learns of Bi-Han's betrayal. Together, they would form this timeline's Shirai Ryu and band together to stop him. But this wasn't quite such a simple process, as recruiting took a lot of time, and some of those that they did recruit weren't quite so talented in hand-to-hand combat. That is, until one day, Tomas would cross paths with a very young man who tried to rob him for food and water. Having sensed the power, rage, and potential behind his fists, Smoke would take this young man in and train him under their ways. The initiate's name? Hanzo Hasashi, part of the first wave initiates of the Shirai Ryu. So like that everyone, that has been it for the history of Smoke across all 3 timelines in the Mortal Kombat universe. And as you can tell, he's had quite the journey throughout the franchise. From enslaved Cyborg to the demonic host of Enera to an orphaned fighter, Smoke really is a character that's continued to evolve and somewhat reinvent himself from timeline to timeline, adding a new flavor and somewhat change to what we've become accustomed to. It's quite impressive and a really smart way of keeping this character fresh, as he doesn't quite feel narratively bound to that of repetition and the somewhat paradoxical nature of timelines and reboots. So with that said, that has been it for this video, and I do hope you have enjoyed it. But for now everyone, that's been it for me. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.